illustrious SSE president who's done groundbreaking research on energy healing. He's going to give us an update of his research. Thank you, Bill.
Okay. I'm actually not going to give you an update on the research. I have some really recent stuff that would make you flop on the floor, but it would be outside the theme of consilience. And so you'll get a taste and we can talk offline, but I am going to use a bunch of my healing data. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, then if there's time I'll tell you I told you, and this will be the line of thinking. I'm going to put up a straw man or two. Materialism and post-materialism, and I'm a serious non-fan of non-materialism or post-materialism. And maybe I'll go into why that is during the talk. I'm going to give you a selection of some of my healing data, and the general idea will be, here are the data, here are the findings, and I'm only going to talk about things for which I have multiple replications in multiple independent labs. So it's not going to be, oh, maybe something weird happened as an anomaly in a particular experiment. It's only going to focus on things for which I have it seriously nailed down, independent labs at independent times. And the general idea will be that neither materialism nor what we sometimes call post-materialism can handle the data, nor can consciousness as primary, nor can, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm going to, at the very least, say we need to consider alternative models. And I'm not going to suggest I have the alternative model, but as I told you at the beginning of today, I'm going to reveal the meaning of life and truth and the American way on Saturday when we try to put the whole thing back together. So right now, we're still on the Thursday, define the problem, and my main emphasis will be defining the problem. Any model has to incorporate, at the very least, these data. So the straw man, and I just stole this from Dean Radin's book. I don't know if Dean's back here yet. He's in a little in the corner. But if we look at materialism, if we look at common sense, if we look at traditional science, and it comes under all of those names, then we have a hierarchy of knowledge. At the base, we have physics stuff, which somehow gives way an emergent property to chemistry stuff, which gives way to biological stuff, which gives way, and then suddenly a miracle occurs. So the end result of this is a miracle. Now, if we have a reductionist approach to the world, it's going to look something like this. We think, of course, on this kind of a knowledge hierarchy, that the world exists out there, it's independent of us, thought doesn't matter, intention doesn't matter, consciousness is just a whatever out there that is tied to wet meat and all those things. On the other hand, folks take the flip side and they put consciousness as primary, in which miraculously physics occurs. Notice miracles occur no matter what you do. And then you have, and then you have, and then you have, and then you have. And so we can put these side by side, and I'm putting up just simplified, because of the lack of time, simplified straw men. We have traditional materialism, whatever name you want, post-materialism. What does post-materialism mean? I mean, really, it's a terrible term. It's like postmodern. What does postmodern mean? Tomorrow? After? Not yet? What is post-material? It's telling you what it's not telling you what it is. And so I would suggest, as we get towards Thursday, we start to think of, could we have a positive description of what we're talking about here and this emerging new models of reality, and not talk about it as it's not the other? Post-material really means it's not that, but it's not saying what it is. Anyway, I quibble. So I'm going to talk about some reliable data done in independent labs, done a whole bunch. These are mice experiments, and I have a bunch of mammary experiments on mice. I have a bunch of sarcoma experiments on mice. These are the number of replications and modifications at various places, universities, and labs. Oncogenic mice, I'm not going to show you any racy pictures, don't get nervous. Extremely aggressive. And then if I kept going, I would have a boatload of in vitro studies. And all of this, I'm focusing on primarily cancer, but it's not entirely on cancer. So what I'm suggesting is I have a lot of data. I'm continuing to get a lot of data. And if we are talking about the stuff we were talking about this morning, those data need to be incorporated into some model of understanding of the way the world works. Materialism's not going to cut it. I'm going to ask you whether post-materialism is, whatever that's supposed to mean, and we'll look at some data. So very, very quickly, just a selection of data or an illustration. What I do, I think in very simple terms, and so I look at something that's already thought to be known, many experiments behind it, a whole lot of researchers working on the same problem, and I interject a single variable. What's the variable? Healing. And so we know what happens before. It's been replicated all over the place. We interject a single variable, see what happens. It's not more complicated than that. So an example would be this. This is a mammary cancer. The tumor grows. It's non-metastatic. It's kind of ugly. This is essentially a dead mouse. There are over 2,000 publications about these mice in the peer-reviewed journals. I introduce a single variable, and then what happens? So the single variable is you sit, I'm not going to show any pictures of anybody else, but you're sitting in a lab, you're dressed funny, and you put your hands around a cage, and then you do my healing technique, which some of you already know. And what happens, you go from an ugly-looking mouse to an uglier-looking mouse, but the uglier-looking mouse starts to develop these ulcerations, and then the tumor implodes, and the mice are cured for life. They're more than cured for life. They're immune to injections of the same cancer for the rest of their life. And so I've done this many times. So what happens? What's supposed to happen? What do? What changes when we do it? And we do this on all sorts of different types of cancers. This is a different kind of cancer. Same thing. The mice start to get ugly looking, and they die within a certain length of time. There are many, many, many published studies on this. We interject the variable. And in this particular kind of cancer, they get cured either by going through a similar process that you find in the mammary cancer, or sometimes it just disappears. And it disappears suddenly. That's going to be one of my phenomena. And the most mysterious thing we've ever found in all the experiments is when they're cured, they all tend to grow a blue arrow on their back. We don't know why that is. Based on my understanding of the world, I would have expected a red, but it always comes up blue, and we simply don't understand that. So, in straw man oversimplification here, here's our materialist, and we can have modifications of that and call it what you will, traditionalist. And here's our post-materialist, and we're thinking, and now I'm going to look at some of the data I've found in all of these experiments. And then your idea is to go bipolar, think like a materialist, try to think like a materialist and say, does this make any sense? And then you go to the other, does this make any sense? And as we go through the data, the question is, who's got the evidence leaning this way or that way, or can either of them account for it? That's really the plot line. So I can back up anything I'm going to say here. I'm just saying it, though, without the backed up empirical data. I'd be happy to go into all of it. Each little bullet would be a talk in and of itself. But right now, without the data, leap of faith, I'm not making this up. Healing doesn't diminish with distance. Now, that nice simple statement, if you're a materialist, does that make any sense? Can you make it make sense? If you're this, does it make sense? And if so, why does it make sense? And would you have predicted this going forward? So 2020 hindsight's wonderful, but if we have this particular hat on, would I have said, as a predictive hypothesis, of course it's not going to diminish with distance because of my understanding of the way the world works. Or, of course it diminishes with distance because of my understanding of the way the world works. You know, same thing, but we just have different hats on, and we have different interpretations of the way the world works. Now, if healing doesn't diminish with distance, this goes to the title of my talk, is there any energy in energy healing? If it's energy, shouldn't it diminish with distance? Anybody know? And we can go back to the laws and all that. Does anybody know an energy that doesn't diminish with distance? Scalar field, scalar this, scalar that, but the energy, the known energies, the materialist energies, the common, it should diminish with distance. Now here's an interesting question. Is it bound by time? I haven't done experiments on that, so I'm not going to put anything up. So if I say healing doesn't diminish with distance, I mean I've got cages of mice here and I've got cages of mice 2,000 miles away, and we've got all sorts of variants all the way through. If you've got this hat on, are you scratching your head going, don't tell me that, it's too upsetting? Because it's pretty upsetting over here, yes? It doesn't diminish with distance. Well, dang. There's a dose response to healing. It's not magic. There are miraculous instances. There are sudden things which occur, but there seems to be a predictable dose response, as if you were doing pharmacological stuff. Now, I think I can live with that, yes? You see where I'm going with this? So if your understanding of the way the world works, would you have predicted there's a dose response to healing? There is a dose response to healing. Healing occurs in sudden, nonlinear bursts. So I showed you one mouse that has the miraculous blue arrow. The day before, it had a big wonkin tumor. And then it was like somebody let the air out. The ulceration that you saw in the brown mouse, suddenly it's going to implode. Now this has methodological implications for people doing studies, as well as clinical applications for people doing clinical things. Methodologically, you set up a study and it goes 10 days. Nothing happens. Your conclusion is nothing happens, healing didn't happen, the world is safe, I can pat myself on the back and relax. But on the 11th day, had you gone that extra day, it would have suddenly imploded. What's the right length of time to declare something a success or failure? Reasonably interesting in and of itself. Now, clinically, imagine if you had a patient, and the patient wants to know, when is this going to work? I've been coming here now for 5 treatments. Well, maybe it was the 6th, and the same thing happens in people. Suddenly it goes away. Who would have predicted that? That's my question. The more aggressive the cancer, the quicker the cure occurs. This is the case in humans, who I like to call uprights. It's the case in mice. If you have an aggressive cancer, it goes away quicker. If you have an aggressive cancer and it's a clinical case, it goes away much quicker. The hardest thing to do is a slow-growing cancer. Now, could that be an indication that there is energy, but the energy is not in the healer, the energy is in the healee? And so the energy of the healee in a non-aggressive cancer doesn't have a lot of juice to do whatever it's supposed to do, but if there's a lot of energy in the system of the healee, it can turn around very quick. What would make it turn around? Would it be energy, or might it be information? Untreated control mice can become part of the larger resonant collective and be healed without overt treatment. Now this is going to exactly mirror placebo effects, and I can mathematically model my mice to placebo studies. I can also model placebo effects in cell cultures. I don't think there's a whole lot of belief in a cell culture. I don't think that placebos are very much psychological. I think they're a physical bonding of spatially separate groups. So if you belong to the religion of locality, and I'm treating a cage of mice here, and there's a cage of mice over there, and that cage gets cured too, I got trouble. So locality is not going to work. If locality is over here, it's an anomaly. Would you predict that over here, is my question. Would you predict that action at a distance should happen? And it's more than action at a distance, which you'd find in something like a field effect. It tends to be selective. I don't know if Imans is here now, but his wonderful meaning, I don't mean to blow smoke, but the wonderful concept of meaning fields goes a long way to trying to understand some of the anomalies that go on within my anomalies. And that is mice here, which are mine, meaning part of the experiment, and mice out there, which are mine, meaning part of the experiment, get cured if I treat these mice. But the ones in the middle, belonging to other people and other researchers, they're not affected at all. There's no field effect. There's a selective attachment to the healing group. Placebos, I can't say that, I don't have it independently replicated. But it's interesting. The more mice in an experiment, the faster they'll collectively be cured. Who would have predicted that? And based upon what? So if you have an experiment and you got 5 cancerous mice, they're going to get better slower than if you have 25 cancerous mice, and they're going to get better slower than if you have 75 cancerous mice. We've tried treating mice 5 at a time, 10 at a time. We've tried treating them for a half-hour treatment. We've tried 45-minute treatments. We've tried hour treatments. We've tried it once a week, 3 times a week, 5 times a week. We've done a lot. The only predictor of the speed of collective cure is the number of mice in an experiment. The more, the merrier. Now this has methodological as well as clinical applications and implications. That's a sidebar. My question is simply, would you have seen that coming? Would you have seen that coming? And how do you see the world in order to see that coming? Sorry, didn't see that coming. If we treat a random number generator directly and make believe it's a mouse, nothing happens. If we treat a geomagnetic probe directly as if it's the client, nothing happens. But if you run these things in a room and you put your hands around a cage of cancerous mice, they go bluey. Bluey's a technical term. So the random number generator won't generate random numbers if the mice are there and have need. Once they're cured, nothing happens to the random number generator. Who would have predicted that? Healing need produces an autonomic response in the brain of the healer, and conscious awareness is completely unnecessary. Independent labs, functional MRIs, double-blind studies. You don't even need to be consciously aware you're healing for the brain to turn on to healing mode. It's a response to need. Anyone predict that? The brains of healer and healee, separated by some distance, exhibit connections analogous to phase locking. So we can have 2 brains go into so many cross-correlations, it's astonishing. Now that doesn't mean it's a psi effect as if the psi effect is a conscious event. I'm not going, oh, something's happening. A sensitive person might, but an insensitive person, I have a continuum from pathological sensitive to bricks. It turns out all can heal the same. But the sensitive feels stuff and the brick feels nothing, yet they both heal the same. Conscious awareness and conscious experience is not relevant to healing. Who would have predicted that? Healing can be stored. In living mice, once the mouse has been treated, you can use that mouse as the seed to the cure. You can take blood from that mouse and put it into another mouse. No healing. The new mouse will be cured. You can scrape cells off and inject it into the other mouse. That mouse will be cured. We can take cotton. We've done a boatload of experiments on cotton. We can take cotton, treat the cotton, and put cancer cells near the treated cotton. They'll genomically change. Who would have predicted that? We've done experiments with water. We treat water, we feed them to mice. The mice are cured, no human sees them. What's in the water? What's in the cotton? How do you make sense of that? And from my point, who would have predicted that? Healing can be recorded. And the playback of those recordings can reproduce healing without human intervention. Healing can be stored not only in stuff, not only in life, but also by recorders. We have a recent publication out a couple of months ago showing the effect of recording healing intention on cancer cells in vitro. We submitted a paper last week, I think, on the effect of healing intention recordings in vivo, and we're trying to see whether we have captured the phenomenon, thereby making it scalable. Who would have predicted that? Does that make any sense? Does that make any sense? So, I'm coming. Very quick. we can't go through the way York just did, look what works, look what doesn't. I don't have the time, but we're happy to talk about that. I think at the very least, consciousness studies need to distinguish attention from intention. And the part that I think is going to be the future of this, and the thing that tends to make more sense, is to take out energy and put in information. Now, the relationship between energy and information, I'm not clear on any more than anybody here is clear on what in heaven's name consciousness is, but it's the but it seems the seems to be informational rather than energetic. Thank you. I time it right? You have a question. Come on, I don't believe that.
Okay, Bill. You said that devices such as REGs and magnetometers show anomalies only when something that actually needs healing is being healed.
Yep. In that room.
You have, it's in the same room as the healing subjects, not necessarily as the healer. You also said that healing can be stored, for instance, in cotton. The healer treats the cotton is then used to treat the target of healing, and they get healed. In that two-stage process, do the instrumental anomalies show up when the cotton is being healed, or when the patients are being healed, or both, or neither?
When there's an application. Only when there's an application of the healing. So if it's sitting there as potential, we, for example, have done a lot of experiments. Can we tell a difference between charged and uncharged cotton? And the answer is no. And even to the extent that we put it under electron microscopes. I mean, we're shooting for anything. We can't find any gizmo that can tell a difference between healing potential and not. But but life in need can tell whether it's been charged or not. And so it's not even life, it's life in need. I got to go here and then we'll talk. Go. Jim.
Speaking of need, Perron Baer did a study in Germany measuring the photon output from his heart during heart-centered meditation. He sat in a cold room in the dark all day, and a few photons came out. Overnight, the investigator who was running the machine, his son, got sick. Perron, the next day, repeated the experiment, and the photon counts went way up.
Yeah.
Only because there was a need. The kid wasn't even in the room.
Need matters.
Which
is why, incidentally, methodologically, people have been asking the wrong question of measuring what happens between healer and healee. Because what happens, it depends on the idiosyncratic needs of the healee.
So I have a question. Jim partly just answered it. And that is one of the things that's bugged me about your research.
Only one?
All right, one of the many things is that it just seems odd. In other words, I haven't seen this same sort of thing happening in other healing modalities.
Yeah, I know, that's one of my problems.
And when we're talking about consilience, we want to generalize.
Yep.
So how much of what you're doing is generalizable and how much is just weird?
I think it's, no, but it's the right question. And quite seriously, I think it's almost all weird. And so if you compare, for example, this is a completely untouched area for systematic research. We tend to think of healing as some homogeneous thing, like it's magic or it's this or it's that. But it turns out just anecdotally, so I'm straying off my script of it's got to be replicated in multiple places. So these are anecdotes and observations and a little speculation. I don't know much about healing. I'm not a healer. I know how to study healing. I know how to generate healing effects, but I'm not a healer. The people who are healers who use my method and use other methods and such, they say there's a real difference. I don't know what that means. And just anecdotally, people who use technique A seem to be able to affect this, and people who use technique B be able to affect that, but they can't do this, and vice versa. And so I think part of the consilience, I think, would be really a very serious look at
generalizing.
Yeah. So some stuff that we've tested anecdotally and experimentally, no effect by these methods. I'm using cancer primarily because it's so responsive. But it's not responsive to most healing methods. And it's in that sense that I say, yup, it's weird.
Okay.
Yeah.
two questions, two short questions concerning operational methodology. How did you establish the phase locking between the healer and the healee? Were you using autocorrelation of EEG traces or something like that?
EEGs, and we tried it with functional MRIs. It was too hard to get things to go simultaneously, to synchronize them. But we have locked EEGs, synchronized and sampled every 500th of a second. And I mean, it was, it wasn't a casual kind of a thing. I'd be happy to give you a paper on it too.
All right. And what about the technique for lack of a better word, suitcasing the healing?
What was it?
What technique did you use to suitcase? In other words, to collect for future
That we
use?
have to talk offline. I have it published, but it's way past unless Margaret will give me through Monday.
Okay.
Yeah.
It has to be short.
Well, okay, I have to make it very short then. All those things that you said, who would have predicted them?
Yeah.
I would have predicted. every
Okay,
one
so
of
there we
those.
go.
And the
You're up
reason-
on Saturday.
Yes.
That's
I'm
why you're going Saturday, because you're going to pull the whole thing together.
Well, I'm on Friday, but
Oh, drat.
the point that I'm trying to make is, if you look at this, if you look at the therapeutic intention research, and you look at the remote viewing research, I think what we're looking at is an information phenomena.
Me too.
It has nothing to do with energy.
That was my point.
And that all of those things that seem so anomalous and strange, once you think of it in terms of energy, are completely consistent, and in fact, they are not anomalous.
That's where I was going, but my job for today, because it's only Thursday, is not to put
Okay.
it together.
All right, sorry. Anyway, we'll have a conversation.
Absolutely.
Oh, God,
Sustain.
will this lady let you speak?
You're talking about yourself being weird, and he's talking about.
I didn't talk about myself being weird. I said the phenomena are weird.
I don't.
Garrett was
wait, hold
accusing
on.
me of being weird.
It's not how I mean it. He was talking about information in the system. So my question to you is it maybe how you're observing reality, which changes how the physics of space and time work and all the laws work.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if it is an information system question, and if it's how you're observing reality, do you have any idea how you're observing reality different than other labs, and can you teach it?
The second question is, apparently I can, although I published a skeptical article suggesting, can healing be taught, ? Because nobody has any really good evidence to my standards.
No.
But
I'm talking about how you're observing reality.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll
way,
have to-
way past my pay grade, we'll have to talk about it
Yeah, well, that's a
offline.
good question
Yeah.
for the break.
Yeah,
Where's Dr. Arnett?
good.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks a lot.